Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sorry about the lateness there. That we had to pray Maghrib and stuff here.
No worries, inshallah, no worries. If you're ready, we can get started then.
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you all for coming down to our first event of DIW Discover Islam Week, where we aim to increase the awareness of everyone here at St. George's, both Muslim and non-Muslim, about kind of Islam and the different facets of this religion. And so today we have Mohammed Hijab coming down. So I'm sure you all know he's a religionist, political scientist, theological historian, author, debater. He's very well versed in all these fields. And he has degrees in politics, a BA in politics, and MA in history, both from Queen Mary's, and then also an MA in Islamic studies from SOAS. He's also underwent formal Islamic studies in Quran, Hadith, Usul and Arabic language, so those different fields. And he's currently doing a postgraduate research. So alhamdulillah, we're very lucky to have him come down today. And so he'll be giving a talk mainly about atheism, and then any questions anyone has, they can be asked in the talk. We'll have a separate Q&A session at the end of the talk. There'll be a Menti code for you to enter any questions that you have, and then we can address those questions at the end of the talk. There was also a prize advertised with the talk. So there's a form for you to fill in, just a couple questions for you to fill in. And then if you fill in those questions, you'll be entered into the raffle. And the form will basically close at the end of the talk, and we'll announce the winner then. But other than that, we'll leave it to Mohammed Hijab.
All right. So I wanted to make this more interactive because obviously the advantage of having sessions like these where there's not that many people in one place in terms of platform is the interactivity aspect, I believe anyway. So I'm going to try and limit whatever it is I have to say to a minimum so that we can get on with questions and answers and that kind of thing. To start off with, really, I want you to consider the following proposition. Consider the following proposition that let me bring an object into the equation. I've got a phone here, right? So this is my phone. All right. Consider the following proposition that this phone is not exploding. This phone is not exploding. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Why is it that this phone is not exploding? Because in order for this phone not to explode, there must be certain things that are in place and certain assumptions that must be operationalized. The first one is a uniformity of nature. So in other words, nature is operating in the same way now as it was in the past and as it will be in the future. So in other words, the fact that this phone continuously doesn't explode is evidence that nature is predictable and is acting in a similar way. So that's the first thing I want you to consider. Now, let's consider another proposition now. Consider the proposition that the universe is not exploding. Now, the same thing can be said of the entire universe. That in order for the universe not to explode, that there must be certain laws which are uniform, laws of nature which are uniform and which are continuous. So that, for example, whatever is happening in the present is an indication of what's happened in the past and may indicate or predict what's going to happen in the future. It's a very straightforward proposition. Now, the question is, how is this intelligible? How is this proposition intelligible? The fact that the universe is not exploding, that the phone is not exploding, that I'm not exploding, right? How does this become intelligible at all? How do we make sense of it? How is it conceivable? All right, so now we have to start thinking about, because this is something quite interestingly what Albert Einstein points out in one of his letters to Solvin. He says something to the effect of, the most inconceivable thing about the universe is that it's conceivable at all. Something to that effect. Now, the universe, the laws of uniformity indicate something. Like we've said, it indicates continuity and structure. Okay. And the very straightforward thing I want to say to you is the fact that the universe is not exploding, right, is an indication that there are laws. And those laws, when you think about the laws, which are continuous and past, present, and in the future, predictive, where did they come from? This is just a simple question. Where did they come from? Either they are necessary, or that they came from chance, or that they were put in place by a lawmaker. These are really your exhaustive options. Now, the thing is, well, let's go with the option of chance. The truth of the matter is, chance is not an explanation at all. In fact, chance or randomness is not something we can even prove, because chance is just our lack of ability to explain things that we don't understand. That's what chance is. There's no such thing as chance. There's no way to prove that chance exists. And I don't think anyone has been convincing in the world of philosophy to that effect. And if it is from chance, let's assume that somehow it's possible. Then you have all these fine-tuning questions. And I'm sure that you've seen or heard of examples about specific, fine-tuning examples, like, for example, the electromagnetic force or the gravitational constant, and had it been, just a little bit different, then the universe wouldn't exist, for example. Martin Rees talks about this in Just Six Numbers, and almost everybody accepts this. Now, even if they don't accept the fine-tuning argument, which basically says that the fact that the universe is able to allow life to exist, any kind of life, indicates that it's fine-tuned for that. There's been really almost no pushback on the fact that there is fine-tuning. Biggest atheist, even Richard Dawkins, talks about what he refers to as the Goldilocks zone, where things are in exactly like a proportionment from these physics perspectives, such that if they weren't, that the universe wouldn't exist. But there's the question of the corrigibility of science. So are these numbers always going to stay the same way? Or are we going to look at the universe in a different way? But that becomes superfluous to the question of uniformity, because the point being made here really is that whatever you want to make of the laws of nature, that we have to admit there are laws, and that these laws are, like I've said, continuous. Now, how are they explicable? We've said already that chance is not really it's a non-option, not only because of these examples that we can give. Many theists have given examples of, like, the Boeing 747 going into a hurricane and reassembling itself, and this is the chance that it would have come from chance. But actually, these are all, for me, they're not the right way to argue. The right way to argue is to say chance doesn't even exist in the real world. Chance is a cop-out, is a scapegoat, is a label you give to something you don't understand. There is no such thing as chance or randomness. It doesn't exist. Another direction is to say that these are all necessary things, so that the laws are there by necessity. But then we have lots of issues by saying that the laws are there by necessity. The first of which is to get out the nominalist conundrum. How do you prove that the laws exist in the first place? Like, in other words, how do you prove that, because the laws are just descriptions of processes in the universe, historical processes, and continuous processes. So how do you actually prove that laws exist in such a way that you, for example, would be able to justify them epistemologically? The question, therefore, of necessity would need to first, because something can't exist by necessity if it doesn't exist at all. First thing someone who says that these laws of nature or whatever exist by necessity has to do is to prove that they exist as more than just descriptors of the state of being of processes, historical processes, past, present, and future. The second problem is this doesn't give us an explanation, because what about these laws are necessary? Because in order for something to be necessary, it must fulfill the condition of not being able to be any other way, that it would be inconceivable that these laws could have been any other way. Much the same way as AB equals BA is axiomatic and you could say necessary, or 1 + 1 = 2 is even necessary. How do you prove that the laws of physics as they are, that the electromagnetic, if you want to use kind of the physics example, constant, or that the gravitational constant, that those things are in fact necessarily as they are the way they should be? It becomes a very important, difficult thing, an impossible thing to prove, because the postulation would be that there's no possible universe where the universe can be any other way. Think about that for a second. If you're to say that the laws of nature are necessary, this is as good as saying that there's no possible universe where the universe can be any other way, which is ironic because some people who do say from the atheist community believe in a multiverse, they also talk about necessity in order to try and get out of the, as we'll talk about, the design argument, or the lawmaker that we must invoke. But if this is a contradiction, because you can't have a multiverse and laws of nature being necessarily the way they are, and that the universe can only be one necessary way. Because by definition, that would mean that there's no such thing as possible existence. In other words, there's no other way the universe could have been. And there's no other way a universe can be. So we have three options. How do we explain the fact, going back to that this phone is not blowing up and that the universe is not blowing up? Option one is that we say it's by chance. We've already said chance is not something you can prove. Chance, even if we assumed its existence, would give us ridiculous results. And I give examples like, for instance, Othello or Macbeth or something. And if I have a bag of letters and I throw them, will I be able to recreate Macbeth or Othello by so doing? The answer is no. And the probability of that being the case is well below zero. So even if we wanted to assume that it's from chance and chance exists, this is problematic. So then we are left with the third and final option, which is actually exhaustively the only option, is that there was a lawmaker, or that there was another entity which is necessary, and I'll explain why it has to be necessary, that acts as an explanation for why the universe is explicable, intelligible, and uniform. That there is a necessary explanation to the fact that we have laws of nature and uniformity. And I say that it has to be necessary because of the contradiction of an infinite regress of dependent or contingent things, not just an infinite regress of causes. Now, many of you have already heard of the infinite regress of causes arguments. So, for example, if I were to say that let's assume that there are an infinite amount of people in the world, and that before I make a phone call, I have to consult with a brother, Musa Khan, that's on this chat. I don't know him, but I can see his name. And that he has to consult Hafsa Ali, who's also on the chat. And it goes on infinitely, regressively backwards. Will I ever make the call? The answer is no, I will not make the call, because there's an infinite regress. And in order to traverse this infinite regress, it would take an infinite amount of time. And therefore, I would never make the call. Likewise, the universe, right? This is like a first cause argument. But the infinite regress of dependent things is different. I'm saying that you can't have things which depend upon other things, which depend upon other things ad infinitum. Because it's like this. If you go and you're walking around and you see a castle, you will assume that this castle has a foundation. You might not have ever seen that foundation, but you will be bedazzled and dumbstruck if you see a castle in thin air. You think, how is this possible? Because from what you understand, a castle must have foundations. Likewise, if you go to the sea, you don't have to see the sea floor to realize that there is a sea floor, because you realize the need for a foundation to hold up all of the water. So you don't see that. Likewise, existence. Likewise, existence. Existence cannot have an infinite chain of dependent things, because that would be the equivalent in the analogy of seeing castles float in thin air or water floating without sea floors in the world that we know. But in fact, the analogy is limited because the sea floor itself requires an explanation, and the foundation of the castle itself requires an explanation. Likewise, however, the foundation of all existence is that it cannot have by necessity an explanation other than outside of itself, which means that the foundation of all existence must be eternally the case, must be pre-eternal and post-eternal. Otherwise, it can't be necessary. It could not be any other way, and it must explain the existence of all other dependent things. So this, I think, is an inescapable conclusion when you think about all of the alternatives. And from the Quranic discourse, from this perspective, the Quran summarizes it in just a few brief and elegant articulations. It says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the creators of themselves? And the third option is so obvious that it does not even require elaboration. And this is talking about the existence of human being, but it can be easily used to talk about the existence of the entire world. Because if we say that, can the universe come from nothing? This is a logical and mathematical and cosmological and empirically unjustifiable thing. Wherever one's objection may be, black holes or something, or some ridiculous examples that they use from within the universe. Because when we define nothing, we're talking about the absence of something. So the universe could not have come from nothing. Black holes don't come from nothing, because they exist within the parameters of the universe, which is not the absence of something. So the universe couldn't have come from nothing. The world and existence could not have come from nothing. And it couldn't have created itself, because that would be the equivalent of like your mother giving birth to herself. That would be the equivalent of your mother giving birth to herself, because you'd have to exist and not exist at the same time. So you're left with the fact that there had to be some kind of creator or some kind of causer that not only caused your existence, but through which you depend. if you think about the logical disjunction and all possible ideas of how the universe came into existence and our existence in respect to that, and all other possible alternatives, you will easily come to the conclusion that there really is no other explanation other than that I've just mentioned, that there had to be a necessary existence. So this is the only thing that will avoid absurdities. The absurdities of infinite regresses of causes, the infinite regresses of dependent or contingent things, the absurdity of something coming from nothing, or indeed the absurdity of something creating itself. With that, I think I've spoken enough. How long have I spoken for? Some time now. And this is how I would argue God's existence. I would show them, or I'd show somebody, whoever it is that wants to. It's because when we look at this now, this necessary being, and we've already given this necessary being this kind of sovereign attributes, independence, pre-eternal, post-eternal, and that there has to be intelligence because he's the lawgiver, or the thing, or this entity is the lawgiver. And if it's the lawgiver, I had to be able to do so. So I had to have creative capacity and intelligence. Otherwise, once again, it's unintelligible and inexplicable that you can have a universe with these laws that came from an ignorant entity. So when you start realizing, okay, well, these are the attributes of this necessary existence, then you come to the conclusion that we've already left atheism, and we realize the limited nature of the atheist worldview. It offers no explanation for anything, and that is a fact. No one will disagree with you on that. Atheism offers no explanation for the existence of anything. In fact, it's completely impotent in being able to explain anything. It's just a position of lack of belief, which is useless to us. All right, we can open it up for questions and answers now.
Okay, thank you for that. So we can either use the Menti code that's in the chat to ask the questions, or just directly message Mohammed Hijab. I think a few questions may have come up already, so yeah, we can just get started like that.
So what am I looking at? Am I looking at the questions?
So if you go to your direct messages, or just go to the chat, I think you should see some.
Well, I think it's best if you choose, because I don't want to, get this wrong. So if you just read out what you think is best to be answered.
Okay, I'll read them out then. That's fine. So the first question is, what do you mean by necessity and something being necessary?
All right. So existence can be divided into three different categories. The first category is an impossible existence, something which it cannot fathomably exist. So, for example, a squared circle. A squared circle is not a thing; it doesn't exist. Although we can elaborate upon a proposed idea of a squared circle, its actualization in a real space is impossible because they're two contradictory things, and so you can't have a square and a circle at the same time. Then you have a possible existence. And a possible existence is something which relies upon something else in order to exist. Like me and you. We rely upon our parents, food, drink, nutrients, the sun, whatever it may be, in order to not only exist, but to continue existing. And then we have a necessary existence, which is a third category, which basically is the opposite of those two things, which is that the thing cannot be any other way, and that it's not dependent upon anything. So we're dependent upon food, drink, mother, father. The necessary existence is not dependent upon anything. And in fact, if you don't have a necessary existence, you won't have any existence at all. This is the direct argument. You can't have a world of only possible existences. Because if you have a world of things that depend upon other things, it's like, not only like, there's a person who's written a nice book which I recommend. I'm not sure if I have it here somewhere. It's a book. There's two that he's written. One of them is called Necessary Existence, and then How Reason Can Lead to God, and both of them by Joshua Rasmussen. If you want to start with something good, the How Reason Can Lead to God by Joshua Rasmussen is probably a good place to start. And if you're still interested, you could read his other book called Necessary Existence. Okay. Now, these will explain what I'm talking about in more detail. But the point is, he makes a nice example. He gives a good example in his basic book, the accessible one, which is How Reason Can Lead to God. And usually the example is of dominoes falling upon each other. Like, you can't have dominoes falling upon each other like forever. He says no. It's not the first domino that we're talking about here. It's the floor which all the dominoes exist upon. This is more analogous of the foundation of creation. And one of the names of God in the Islamic tradition is Al-Qayyum. Al-Qayyum is translated as the maintainer, but it comes from the Arabic word qama yaqumu, which literally means to stand. So just as dominoes, in this kind of analogy that he gives in this book, just as dominoes stand on a foundation and require it in order to fall upon each other, right? So too, we must exist within a context of an ultimate foundation which is independent and which explains why everything else exists. And in another way, you can say the Quranic expression is as-samad, the thing that everything depends upon, and it depends upon nothing. And this is obviously, from a Quranic perspective, one of the most important attributes of God, and it's in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Allahu Samad. So he's God, one and only. They say the eternally besought of all, or one translation, or the sovereign, or the independent, whatever kind of translation you like. But this is the idea.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, how would you respond to evolution, concepts like Darwinian evolution, etc.?
Darwinian evolution is a valid theoretical model. It's a valid theoretical model, like evolution by genetic engineering or neo-Lamarckian evolution. Obviously, Darwinian evolution is the most popular one. From a theological perspective, the slither of the theory of evolution which we disagree with or we don't believe is human evolution. And that is because we have a special narrative for the creation of human being. And the special narrative indicates that the human being was created directly from God. There was a first human, and that human beings proliferated from that human being. And there's lots of things that differentiate human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom. The ability to question why, civilization, language, morality, and intelligence. And all of those things combined, we believe, if you think about the animal kingdom and you think about evolution, and the human being, there is a clear line of demarcation. So we have a theological narrative. Now, someone may object to this on the basis of supposed evidences and existence of other hominids and Homo sapiens who apparently existed for 300,000 years, or at least that's what some fossil records indicate. We would say we don't deny the existence of hominids, nor do we deny the age of the universe is 13 or 14 billion years, according to Big Bang cosmology. We don't care about those things. We don't have an young age creationist overview of the situation. But what we're saying is that there is a special narrative when it comes to the creation of human being, And in fact, not just the first human. We have special narratives concerning Jesus, because now it's natural. By the way, there is no way. The problem of Jesus being conceived from immaculate conception is as big as as Adam coming from God directly. I'll tell you why. I mean, Jesus Christ, we believe as Muslims, and so do Christians believe, he didn't have a father, a worldly father. Okay, now, no scientist could agree on that. It's as simple as that. There's no way, because science is based on methodological naturalism. And what we're proposing is a set of supernatural events. So since science is based on methodological naturalism, and the idea of Jesus Christ having no father is seen as miraculous, then the same thing would be applicable to Adam. Such that if we looked, okay, this man has a mother. If any biologist or evolutionary looked at Jesus Christ, they could not grant the premise that this person had no father, or that the person was not conceived of sperm or fertilization or conventional fertilization. They would have to say he has a family and as patrilineal lineage and matrilineal lineage. They have to say that. Likewise, talking about Jesus, we have a miracle of Jesus Christ in the Quran, which is found in the Gospel of Thomas, but not in the kind of Gospels or the New Testament, which is that Jesus Christ, one of his miracles was that he had a clay bird and he blew into it. And when he blew into it, it had life. It gave the bird life. And this is mentioned in the Quran as a miracle. Now, I'll put a question forward that if an evolutionary biologist encountered this bird that had life breathed into it and it was clay and became living, they would classify it evolutionarily. They may even say this bird comes from this family and this is ancestors and so on and so forth. But the reality of the situation, from our perspective at least, is that the bird came from clay directly from the hand of Jesus. Now we are making a supernatural claim, and there is no way to verify a supernatural claim on a scientific method. So, and this is, the Quran acknowledges this, by the way. The Quran, in fact, this very question the Quran acknowledges in 2 verses. The Quran says, وَقَدْ خَلَقَتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. We have created you before and you were nothing. And then Allah says in the Quran also, مَا أَشْهَدْتُهُمْ خَلْقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَا خَلْقَ أَنفُسِهِمْ. We have not made them witness the creation of the heavens and the earth, nor the creation of themselves. So this is something which it will have to be speculative, and it's unverifiable, quite frankly, which also means it's unfalsifiable. So the claims that we're making about Adam are 2 things. They're unverifiable because science is based on methodological naturalism, and supernatural claims are not equated in that. But they're also unfalsifiable because it's logically conceivable that these things can happen, especially considering that you have an all-knowing, all-powerful God and so on. So the most someone can say about this is it fits into the scheme of unseen faith, which we as Muslims uphold.
Okay, so the next question is, if you were born in a different culture, would you still be a Muslim?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a counterfactual question about hypothetical. But if the question is talking about whether non-Muslims that are born in non-Muslim cultures, that whether they would be judged, would they be judged for being non-Muslims if they had not been given the same exposure as Muslims who have been born in the Muslim culture? The answer is no, because the Quran says, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا, that we were not going to punish them until we send a prophet to them, or a messenger. And this is in chapter 17, verse 15. And so the scholars of Islam have said that we don't believe that all non-Muslims are going to hell. We believe that non-Muslims who have been given exposure and understand the message, and who reject the message after being shown the evidences, those are the ones who are going to hell, not just non-Muslims in general.
So the next question is, how do Muslims define modesty?
Different Muslims define it in different ways. And you'll find with concepts like these, abstract concepts, that there will not be a uniform definition. You'll find that bravery, masculinity, femininity, what was the one you used? Whatever you just said, I forget which one you said. Modesty, yeah, that's what you said. All of those things are, it would take some kind of looking at the entirety of the tradition and coming to conclusions about it. And I'm sure different Muslims will have different conclusions about it.
Okay, so the next question is, would you argue most people aren't really atheists anyway? They're
Pardon?
likely agnostics at best,
Yes.
and don't really want to deal with the questions of their existence.
Would I argue that?
Yeah, that's the question, yeah.
I mean, that's certainly some of the themes that we find in continental philosophy. I mean, in the Western philosophical tradition, especially in the modern period, philosophy is divided really into analytic philosophy and continental philosophy. And obviously within the continental tradition is most, if not all, like 95% of Western philosophy departments in the UK, US, Canada, and other places are analytical philosophy departments. So which requires some kind of analysis, whether it's using formal language like predicate logic or propositional logic, modal logic, or whether it's engaging in methods of explication, or even if it's in normal prose, but making arguments that can be, in a sense, scrutinized. This is the hallmark of analytic philosophy. Whereas continental philosophy, like existentialism and so on, like if you look at Martin Heidegger, he would certainly agree with the statement that you made, because interestingly enough, he was talking about how you can be more authentic as an individual. And famously, one person asked him in his lecture or something, what makes people more authentic? And he said that you go and visit the graves. And his argument was that people are just distracting themselves from the painful reality of death, whether it's to death of themselves or loved ones. And our daily activities are sedating ourselves, and we're in a somnambulant, kind of almost intoxicated, distracted state. He calls it the thrownness into the world. We've been thrown in the world, and we have this existential angst and existential crisis. And his remedy for it is to go to the graves. And no doubt that's what the Prophet Muhammad said as well, you know. And so I think that people don't like thinking about death and what happens after it, and if there is evidence for anything that happens after it. But these are the most critical questions that, for me, if human beings don't ask, they, degenerate themselves to lower than their basic human function and put themselves on par with animals and other beasts. So yeah, for sure, I think atheists and agnostics today, in a hyper-sexualized and technological society, but not only those, Muslims and Christians and a lot of people are just consumed and distracted by those things, and they may live an entire life of 70 years not even thinking about what happens after death, which is delusion, and it's almost a psychological, I would call it pathology, really, to be honest. That's pathological behavior. So I would agree with that statement to a high extent.
So the next question is, if God exists and he's ever loving, then why does he create natural evil like earthquakes, etc., and cause pain and suffering?
God is loving, but he's also just and wise. And the classical kind of problem of evil argument that is probably the most cited positive argument for the lack of existence of God. In fact, Graham Opie writes a small book, who's an atheist, academic atheist, called Proofs Against God. It's about 90-page book, and he mentions so many things in there. And actually, he mentions no arguments against God. He's just counter-argument the arguments for God. And the only thing he mentions as a positive argument for God's non-existence is the problem of evil. But many people in philosophy now have realized the futility of this argument, because this argument was originally made by Epicurus in the Hellenistic time, and he said that if God is all powerful and he's all good, then how could he allow evil in the world? And this argument was counteracted so much so that people like William Rao and others who are atheists, they refer to it as an intellectually bankrupt case. Alvin Plantinga, whose book I'm not sure if I've got it here. He's written a really good book on this called God, Evil, and Suffering. It's a very small book. It's a very small book. You can buy it online, and it's pretty good on this question of suffering. But the Islamic answer, and for me, is very satisfying answer, is that life is a test and God is all wise. Like, we don't believe in a God with three attributes, that he's all powerful and he's all good. We believe in a just God, but a wise God. And how can you prove that as an atheist that evil exists in the first place? Once again, you go back to this problem of trying to prove something which you can't. I mean, evil is a construct on atheistic understandings or naturalistic understandings. There's no such thing as evil, in fact. That's what in The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins admits this. Certainly, Bertrand Russell believes that. Not only Bertrand Russell, but Nietzsche believes in that. Beyond good and evil, he says that. So, at the end of the day, we say that just because something is painful, it doesn't mean it's bad. And there's a verse in the Quran, very brief and beautiful. It says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And it might be the case that you hate something, but it's good for you. And Allah knows, and you don't know. So it's a test.
So the next question
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry. You say it's impossible for something to exist without a beginning, without a foundation, but aren't you kicking the can down the road by saying that God came first? What is God's foundation?
No, it's a straw man of the argument. I've never said that. What was the proposition? What were they saying that I said? Can you repeat it?
So you said it's impossible for something to exist without a beginning, without a foundation.
No, I know. I never said that. I never said it's impossible for something to exist without a beginning. Never said that. I said that the foundation, I said that it's impossible to have an infinite regress of dependent things, which is a completely different articulation. And by the way, the cosmological argument doesn't say everything has a cause. Doesn't say that. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. That's what Al-Ghazali says. كل شيء له بداية له سبب. العالم له بداية إذن العالم له سبب. He says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then they say there can't be an infinite regress of causes. Now, the articulation in the first premise is not everything has a beginning. That's just a misreading of the entire argument. No one would be foolish enough to say that, because clearly we believe that God does not have a beginning. And that it's not only that God doesn't have a beginning, that we require something with no beginning in order to explain everything that has a beginning. Otherwise, all things with a beginning will be inexplicable. There's no explanation for them. So in order to explain things with no beginning, you have to have something with no beginning. That's what we're saying.
Okay, so the next question, I think you kind of answered this previously, actually, on one of your Sapiens Institute videos, but it's, can you explain when Ibn Abbas narrated and was explaining the creation of the pen, that it writes destiny? He goes on to then describe how the earth was created and spread on the back of a whale.
Ibn Abbas doesn't mention this, and it's not mentioned, like you said, anywhere. This is a fabrication. Okay, people need to understand, just because something is mentioned in the books of At-Tabari and Tafsir, it doesn't mean that we believe it as Muslims. There are things like, for example, the satanic verses. Which Muslims believe in the satanic verses? They're mentioned in our books because, and this is actually testimony to the fact that Islam preserves things even though it's counter-narrative, which in historical terms is called the principle of embarrassment. Shows you the veracity of the compilation methods of the early Muslims. They were not discriminatory in terms of what they allowed in the compilations. There's a difference between what's compiled and what's authenticated. Right, so the main issue here is, if you go into Tabari's tafsir or Ibn Kathir's tafsir or Al-Bidayah and Nihaya, or one of these kind of Islamic historical books, or indeed even the seerah, the biographies of the Prophet by Ibn Hisham or by Ibn Ishaq or whoever it is, we are not saying that everything in there is true, that is actually happened, it's historically correct. And so we have a historical method of preservation. All of those riwayat that quote Ibn Abbas supposedly saying that the earth was on the back of a whale, something to that effect, these are fabricated. They don't have an authentic narration. Muhammad ibn Wahb and those individuals that I can get you the chain of narration, but as you've mentioned, it's in the Sapiens YouTube channel, and I've got a video on this very contention. It's fabricated. It's even for us, it's less convincing as evidence as the Bible than the Bible is. There's, I don't believe that's religion. And even if it was authentic, I would reject that, to be honest. If that was an authentic hadith, I would reject it because it's so unreasonable and out of line with reality. And why would I reject it? Is because this is actually a very legitimate way. It's called illah. And you can have عِلَّة نَصِّيَّة and عِلَّة سَنَدِيَّة. عِلَّة is a defect. This, if something is so out of line with observable reality, then it's rejected. And that's why one of the things we say, there's nothing like that in the Quran. And there's certainly nothing like that in the authentic Sunnah. And if there was something like that in the authentic Sunnah, we would even reject it because of not the Quran, but the authentic Sunnah would reject that because the illah is so strong. In fact, there's examples of rejection of hadith on that basis. I'll give you those if you like. There's some authentic narrations and stuff. A man came with the Prophet ﷺ, apparently with a book that has all of the people's deeds in there, you know, and apparently it's got everyone's deeds in the book. Al-Dhahabi says, this is nonsense. How big would that book have to be? You know, he said, so that is, Al-Dhahabi is one of the premier gold standard medieval, you know, pre-modern, if you want to call it that, you know, hadith specialists. He says, throw this, you know, he says, illah. It's just a defect of the hadith. Obviously now we have memory cards and stuff, so it becomes actually ironically more feasible. But the idea is, this is not something which we believe in. If people from different faith groups want to use things we don't believe in to attack what we do believe in, I would call that desperation, to be honest.
Okay, so the next question is, how would you reply to an atheist who asks, is God dependent on his creation to exercise his attributes, i.e. being the most merciful? Since if there was nothing, who would he show mercy to?
So the answer is no. He's not dependent on anything. God is not dependent on anything. That would deny the fact that he's a necessary existence if he was dependent on anything. There's a difference now between having attributes and enacting them, and the latter doesn't mean, or the lack thereof does not mean the attribute doesn't exist. For example, I'm sure you're a very charitable person, a very nice guy. Maybe the person who's asking this question is a very loving guy. Maybe he loves his parents. Maybe he loves his wife or husband or whatever it may be. Unfortunately, now there's boyfriend, girl, it could be whatever. It could be a non-Muslim. But if you tell me now, if I put you in a desert island, does that mean that you stop being a loving person just because the object of love is not there? You continue having the ability to love, and you may very well still be the loving person, but it just means that you're not acting on it. And we've never said that the attributes of God, which are verbal or that rely on action, have to always be instantiated in the material world. God has will, and in fact, the Islamic model is this: there's three types of things. God has intrinsic attributes, so these are attributes that are always in existence, obviously, and always being actualized. The fact that God is pre-eternal, post-eternal, that he is, in fact, these are lack of attributes, the lack of beginning or lack of end. They refer to it as sifat salbiya. But you can say also the fact that God is all powerful, all knowing. These are always the case. God, if he ever becomes other than that, he will stop being God. So that's muhal aqlan. It's impossible that those attributes can ever change. Then God has a will, and the will now directs those attributes which are ikhtiyariya or fi'aliya, which are basically those attributes which are verbal attributes. God has the ability to communicate and speak, kalam, for example. He can decide to do that or not to do that. God has the ability to show mercy. You know, he's always merciful, but he can show it or not show it depending on his will. He can show justice. He can with justice, he always has to show. God has written upon himself that he always is merciful and that he will not be unjust. So that's basically the answer to the question. Just because God is not showing something, it does not mean he's not being something. Just like this is the case with human beings as well. It's because you're not showing your love to your child when he goes to school. It doesn't mean that you don't love your child.
So the next question is, how can we prove to atheists that the Quran is a word of God, as they will demand proof not from the Quran?
There's, I think, many adjudicating methods. One of them is to look at the fact that the Quran, there is an argument for preservation. And when we say preservation, we're talking about the lack of insertion or omission. There's not been foreign insertion or omission to the Quran. And the way it was being recited then is the way it's being recited now. This is a preserved book. And this is a necessary but not sufficient, because we would divide it into two things: necessary and sufficient. Necessary conditions, but not sufficient. So this is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Then you have another condition, which is the lack of contradictions in the Quran. And the fact that the Quran is the only text, actually, the ancient religious text, that has this falsification method. It says, لَوَجِدُ فِي اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا, chapter 4, verse 82. So that you have that as well. So these are once again in the necessary but not sufficient category. And then you have now the kind of positive arguments that we make. So for example, the predictions of the future. And there are books that have been written on it. For example, Ira has a book now called The Forbidden Prophecies, which you can download for free. And there is a YouTube channel you can visit called Many Prophets, One Message, which will give you nice 10-minute summaries of what I'm talking about. Many Prophets, One Message is the name of the YouTube channel. So it tells you some of the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran that couldn't have been known at the time. You know, I was watching something like with Joe Rogan. He has a podcast, and he was getting so excited because this guy called H.G. Wells he predicted, that there's going to be internet, blah blah blah. But H.G. Wells died in the 30s or something like that. Like how, and he was like shocked. How did he know this? And well, if you knew about it, if you're shocked about that, look at the kind of things that are in the Quran Sunnah, where there's talk about that yatatawaluna fil bunyan, that there'll be these barefooted Arabs are gonna compete for the tall buildings. That it's talk about what empires are gonna be victorious, like the Romans will beat the Persians in chapter 3, verse 1 to 6. The spread of sexually transmitted diseases that didn't exist before. Many examples. Many examples. The fact that where Islam will spread, east and west. زُوِيَ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ فَرَأَيْتُ مَشَارِقَهَا وَمَغَارِبَهَا وَإِنَّ أُمَّتِي سَيَبْلُغُ مُلْكُهَا مَا زُوِيَ لِي مِنْهَا. That it was projected to me, the earth, and I saw its east and west parts, and that my ummah, the Muslims, will reach those places, what was projected of it for me. And he even is more specific as to where Islam will spread. عُدُدْ سِتًّا بَيْنَ يَدَيِ السَّاعَةِ, count 6 things before the day of judgment. موتي ثم فتح بيت المقدس, my death, and then the conquest of Jerusalem. That Islam is going to go to Egypt, that it's going to go to Yemen, that it's going to go to Syria, that it's going to go to Palestine and Jordan, that it will take over the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire. That the last emperors of the Persians and the Romans will happen. That those two empires will come to an end. That Islam will spread to India. Sataghzun al-Hind. Huge. What kind of thing is this? I mean, Barnaby Rogers, interestingly, he says in his book, he says, obviously he's a non-Muslim. He says the fact that Islam spread to the places that it spread is equivalent to Eskimos spreading to, or Eskimos, maybe let's say in Greenland or something, taking over the Russians and the Americans. We have these people going all over the world now with the most spreading and all that kind of stuff of religion, and all of it is predicted. Like, that's mind-blowing. Talking about H.G. Wells, and he's mind-blown by it, smoking this and that, excited. So if you're so excited by that, look at these. You not find something like that in other religions, and I can tell you that with conviction and certainty. Look at the biblical discourse. You have the Olivet discourse. Go and just research, Google the Olivet discourse, where it says literally that the end of the world is going to happen in one generation after Jesus. Take a look at it. And you have a whole school of thought called dispensationalists that talk about it and try and reconcile it with the reality and so on. There's nothing like what you find in the Quran and other and Hadith about predictions and so on other religions. I'll give you another thing as well. Look at the historical. Let me give you one. This book here this is quite interesting. It's called, for those Arabic readers, it's called Barahin al-Nubuwwah by Dr. Sami Amri. He makes these arguments. Some of them are more convincing than others, by the way. Very interesting. You can get it. But I'll give you an English link. Now, within the same YouTube channel that I talked about, Many Prophets, One Message, this next category of thing that adjudicates, which is history. And you can look at it's mind-blowing. Look at the Bible. They say that the Quran copied from the Bible. They say that. But you know, the Bible, when it talks about Moses and Pharaoh, it never mentions Pharaoh said that he was God. Now, this is common knowledge now in Egyptology, that not only did he consider himself to be God, if we consider him to be Ramses II, or indeed any of those that came before and after him, why the Egyptologists consider Pharaoh to be Ramses II is because Merempata that came after him, he had a stela, which is basically like a rock thing that they write their history on it, in hieroglyphics. And they talk about Beni Israel, the children of Israel having left the land and so on. So obviously he was the predecessor to Ramses II. And the Quran mentions that Pharaoh says, "Anna rabbukumul a'la," I'm your Lord, the Most High. The Bible doesn't even mention that. But if we assume that it's Ramses II, go and look at the history of Ramses II. There's no doubt that he deified himself, and that they believed in other lesser deities, these Ra and Amun and these Isis and Horus, and they believed in these mythological. There's zero doubt about that. The Quran mentions both of those facts. The fact that Pharaoh says, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la," and I'll get you the other verse now, just so I can remember it. 1 second. Ya Dhara. Yeah, it's in Surah Al-Anbiya. Well, no, not that one. I've got the other. Well, basically, there's another verse which references the aliha of the Egyptians, which are the gods of the Egyptians, other than Pharaoh, who claimed to be God. This is one of many things historically that we always use the example as well of Joseph, and how in the Quran it refers to his leader as king, and it refers to the leader of Moses as Pharaoh, where the Bible refers to both of them as Pharaoh, and that's ahistorical, and they admit this now. You know, but you can see all of those arguments in the video which I've mentioned in Many Prophets, One Message. Is something effective like this, the shocking precision of the history in the Quran or something like that. And it's on my channel as well. You can check that out. But if we think about it, the Bible is a contradictory book. It's a contradictory book by the admission of their major scholars. It's a contradictory book. I was reading Origin of Alexandria and his book called The First Principles. And Origin of Alexandria, he mentions in the back of his, like I don't know what you call it, appendix, but it's not really an appendix. He mentions, and I'll try and get these, I've actually written something on this, I'm going to release it. He mentions the contradictions between the Bible. He says, for example, the Genesis narrative, that the night and day are created on the first day, and on the fourth day, the luminaries were created. He said, how can this be? How can you have night and day with no luminaries, right? Without sun, moon, how can you have that? And in other parts of the Bible, it says that, look, there's all kinds of contradictions. I'll give you just two. One is that what I've just mentioned. The other one is that the plantation is mentioned as being created, or the vegetation comes out on a certain day. Now, put aside the scientific issues, because there are huge ones. Look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, or something like this. It says that no plant has sprouted out yet, or something like this. But we thought the vegetation had already been created. So he knows this. So he said we have to spiritualize the meaning. We have to metaphorize it. Why do we have to metaphorize it? Because it's out of line with observable reality. In fact, he mentioned origin, a verse in the Bible which says that Jesus was taken to the top of a high mountain and he saw all the nations of the earth. He says, how can you see? How so? He goes, how so? With his fleshly eyes to see all the nations, as if all the empires were the mouth or at the foot of the mountain. And now we would say, believing in the round earth model, how are you going to see the other nations from the other side anyway? So he had to keep metaphorizing it. And then some guy called, and this is interesting, man. Some guy called, I think his name is Cecil or something like this. He came to him and he said, look, in this Origin of Alexandria, one of the biggest church writers of the Alexandrian school, because you had two major schools, Alexandria and Antioch, and Alexandria had like Philo, who's a Jew, and then you had Origin of Alexandria, you have Clement of Alexandria, and they were more into metaphorization. The other guys were not. Like, he was seen as a radical in the way that he hermeneutically metaphorized the text. But listen to this. One guy came to him and he said to him, how can you say, and I've got the quote if anyone wants to challenge me on it. If anyone wants to challenge me, and I've presented it to big people, and they were dumbstruck by it, believe me. So he goes, how can you say that your God is died on a cross and he's meant to be the all-powerful? Talking about Jesus. And he goes, yeah, we can metaphorize it, something to the effect of spiritualize the text. So if you're allowed to spiritualize everything, you've now nullified the crucifixion, the resurrection, and all those pillars of your religion. So the fact that there's contradictions in their book, they admit to it and they spiritualize the text because of it. And the danger is that if they continue doing that, it destroys their entire religion and makes it meaningless. Whereas we will never find the equivalent of Origin of Alexandria saying that there's contradictions of the Quran. And so this is a serious evidence for the veracity of Islam. It's a serious evidence. When we use these other things that are outside to adjudicate whether it's history or the future, and we're looking retrospectively, or we look at these contradictions or lack thereof in the case of the Quran, we realize that actually you can align spirituality with rationality. You can do that. And this has been the big struggle of the Christian world. And we as Muslims need to show how that's very possible. But these are three of many examples I can give. There is a small booklet I've written called the 10 Proofs of the Evidence of... can I put it on the chat or something? Will it work? Huh?
Yeah, if you put it on the chat, then I'll send it so everyone can see it.
Okay. I need to kind of read... I need to renew this because I've got some more information now on it. 1 second, sorry. Yeah, no, the website guy needs to sort it out. He needs to sort it out. But yeah, I'll get it done, inshallah. But yeah, for sure. You go for now to Many Prophets, One Message. Download The Forbidden Prophecy, which is a free book. Download and watch those videos. I think that will be a good introduction.
Okay, I think we'll end it on this last question, if that's okay with you, inshallah.
Yeah.
If Islam is based on perspective and people's interpretation of the Quran teachings, how do you know what's right?
I don't understand. Can they tell me what they mean by that? Because I just don't know. Yeah. What do you mean?
It's trying to say that a lot of the Quran is based on tafsir and etc. And it's maybe not clear cut written, this tafsir, the explanations of the meanings of the verses. So how do you know what's right if that's the case?
Are you asking from a pastoral perspective or the Are you asking that, well, or is this an argument against Islam? Like in the sense that, is the formal argument here that the truth is unknowable, therefore the truth is not, it doesn't exist? Or is it more like, how do we find out, like, what do we do on a day-to-day to assert, like, what fatwa is correct or what opinion is right? Which of those two?
I think it's from a non-Muslim's perspective, the fact that people have a role to play with interpreting the Quran, basically.
Yeah, well, I've always said to people, look, 0 divided by 0, what's the answer to that question? Is there any mathematicians here that can help me out?
10.
10? Brother, come on, man. I don't know. You guys are all doing medicine. That's right. Yeah.
You can't divide by 0.
You're saying you can't divide. Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing. I researched this some time ago. What's 0 divided by 0? And I asked the mathematicians, and you know what they said to me? And maybe I'm wrong, or they're wrong. Some said to me it's infinity, yeah? And someone said 1. And others said 0. And others said it's undefined. I was thinking, wait a minute. And then one of them was really honest, and he said, look, there's a difference of opinion among the scholars as to what this is. And you think something as strong as mathematics wouldn't have such difference of opinion. But the existence of difference of opinion is not the existence of the lack of truth. Like, Faraz Zahabi, one of my friends, he says, look, JFK, you know, this president, he was killed. And there's different theories as to how he was killed. Conspiracy theories, this theory, that theory. He was shot by this person, inside job. I don't know, like the theories that are out there. Now, just because there's different theories, it doesn't mean he wasn't shot. Now, the Quran actually has a way of dealing with this. It says, مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابُ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. That the Quran has 2 types of verses. Some of them are ambiguous and some of them are unambiguous. And that we should be following as much as we can the ambiguous verses of the Quran and base our faith on them. And those for those which are ambiguous ones, we should be following the unambiguous verses. And as for the ones which are ambiguous, we should try and realize that this is for the rasikhuna fil ilm, the high people of knowledge, you know, and not try and base our faith on those. And so in reality, there are some aspects of Islam which are very straightforward. The oneness of God, the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the 5 pillars of Islam, the 6 pillars of Iman. These are clear cut. There's almost no discussion about those things. But there are other things in Islam which are difference of opinion. And God doesn't hold us to account for that which we don't know. But we should try and hold on as much as we can to the foundational things. And formally, the argument is redundant, which is the argument that just because there's difference of opinion, there is no truth.
Okay, just to clarify, I think the question has clarified that this is from a Muslim's perspective. I think you touched on that anyway.
I would say that in terms of this Muslim perspective, look, there's, in terms of fiqh or jurisprudence, then try and follow a madhab as much as possible, because that will just make your life easier. Whether it's the madhab al-Hanafi or the Shafi'i or the Hanbali, or just get a book and get a teacher, get them to go through, especially like how to pray, how to do wudu, how to fast, according to that madhab. That'll make your life much easier. You don't need to go into great detail, because we don't have the time to go into details about, all the hadith and this compiling. You guys are medical students. Some of you will enjoy that kind of thing, no doubt, but you just need to have a base of the madhab. And then when it comes to fatawa now, because some things are new and current, and there's different scholars that come and speak about things. So, for example, one of the things I appreciate was from a scholar called Mohammed Hijab. He's a Mauritanian scholar. He says, Well, you look at you try and make sense of them and see which one makes more sense. So if someone gives you a fatwa A and fatwa B, try and look at them and see if there's one of them makes more sense than the other one for you. And sometimes it can be visible, right? So you'll be more kind of convinced by one or the other. And if you can't do that, then go with the easier one. You can also go with the more, you could say, with ihtiyat one, which is the one that is more, how did you translate ihtiyat? No. There's more, it's the basically the stricter one, just in case. But
the safer one.
The safer one, yeah, even safer. So these are your choices. You either go with the easier one or the safer one. For me, I personally, when it comes to the 5 pillars, I go with the safer one. And when it comes to anything outside of that, I might go with the easier one. But why do I go with the easier one? Is it because I'm sahib al-hawa? No, it's because the Prophet ﷺ did that. And there's a hadith of Aisha where she says that the Prophet, whenever he was confronted with two difficult things, he'd always choose aysarahuma, the easier one of those. Especially when you've got difficulties, like if you go on Hajj with your parents or something, and they're finding it difficult to do that, just go with the easier opinion if it has to be. Because so long as it's legitimate opinion, then it's legitimate opinion. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you really do feel like, oh, this one's right and this one's wrong, then you can't try and deceive yourself. And I think that's the balance. Just make life easier for you, yourself, and the people, because the Prophet said, you won't make the deen hard on yourself, so difficult, except that it will destroy you and it will overtake you, basically. If you try and go for the hardest opinions and do. No. It's not always the authenticity. Like some people think, to be authentic, they get the raw, the most difficult fatwa. And a lot of us, when we start religious journey, like I did maybe 15 years ago or something, I'm making it sound like I'm an old guy. I'm only like probably 5 or 10 years older than you guys, yeah. But when I was like a young man, and I started the religious journey, I would go for the hardest opinions always. And I would impose that on my family as well. I impose it on everybody. As much as I can impose it, I would be very tough with everything. And then I realized, after reading and listening to different scholars and different opinions and stuff, I started to calm down a bit, to be honest. I thought, well, there's this opinion, that opinion. This one's actually not that bad. Why should I make life so difficult for somebody? Like in the Shafi'i school of thought, if you touch a woman, if you're a man, or if you touch a man, if you're a woman, it breaks your wudu. But imagine going to Hajj and you're going to be touching because everyone's like crowded and this and this. It will be a disaster if you follow that opinion, with all due respect. And in marriage, there's lots of, and divorce, there's lots of opinions there that make life harder for people and make life easier for people. So we have to look at those as well. And they're all sometimes as legitimate as one another in terms of like their weight. And so we just have to we have to look at those. And if it's there are some red flags, guys. I have to be honest. Like there's some scholars that have said some things which have not been said before, or the way that they've said it has not been said like that before. And I'm not going to mention any more controversies because I've been getting in trouble on Twitter recently by mentioning those examples. But definitely, like, if you see someone who says something outrageous, even if it's a big scholar, and I don't care what school of thought you're from, if you're a Salafi or if you're a Hanafi, or if you don't know nothing about any of that stuff, or if you're more Ikhwan oriented, whatever you are, like, there's going to be some guy in your group that says some crazy stuff. And even if they're the big scholars, you just leave that out, because that's what's going to cause problems introducing stuff like that into the Muslim world. So I don't want you to go to an extreme where, because if I wanted to look, I can find easy opinions that like smoking weed is allowed or some stupid things like that. Or no, I'm not talking about those kinds of things, man. You know, or yeah, I don't even want to say them, because some guys are going to say, oh, maybe this is maybe this is the opinion we need to follow. There's some opinions out there that are shadh, that are anomalous. I'm talking about where the opinion is mu'tabar. You know, where there's two legit opinions on a matter, and there's both of them got like quite a lot of weight in terms of scholarly opinion. And then you choose, you don't know which, this guy is saying this and this, but they've both got precedent, a lot of strong precedent, and you don't know where to go, so you're going to choose one of the two. That's what I'm talking. I'm not talking about going, oh, now I'm going to start smoking weed because the Zahiriyya believe in that. Well, Zahiriyya believe that mortgages are not haram. So someone's going to say, wait a minute now, who are these Zahiriyyas? We need to we need to know more about Zahiri madhab, because it's like it's another madhab. Okay, they don't believe it because they believe it has to be gold and silver, and they don't do qiyas on money. So money is not, you know. So the Zahiris will say that, and those actual Zahiris will get a mortgage and have no problem with that. You know, so you got to be careful here with these opinions. And sometimes you can go with an easy opinion that can have a bad effect. Sometimes you can go with an easy opinion that has a huge net societal impact. Like in the Hanafi school, from my understanding, you don't need the father's consent for a woman to get married. She can just do it by herself. Now, obviously, this is infirad al-madhab, and that's what the madhab says, but it's not what the other people say. There's certainly, like, there's hadith, nikah illa bi wali, there's no nikah except for the wali. But that is an opinion in that Hanafi madhab, and they have the adillah, by the way. And I've looked at some of the adillah, but if you do it now, and you know what your family are going to react like if you do that. No one's going to say you're doing zina. We're not going to accuse you of that, but you could destroy your family for it. You know, you can destroy your family by doing something like that. So you got to be clever. And so you got it's a lot of it is not even just following a fatwa, or it's about knowing the implications of what you're following. There are fatwa out there. You can do lots of things. There are things in the deen that you can do. There's a lot of loopholes, by the way. I come to realize, and I tried lots of those in my life, and I was stung and realized, like, you know, you have to use your wisdom, and you don't want to hurt yourselves as young people by trying to do these loopholes. You know, a lot of the brothers and sisters say, "What are these loopholes that you're talking about? Let me come in. Maybe I should do a course on the loopholes and how to get away with." You know, we can do a whole course on it. There are some people who specialize. There's a guy in Birmingham who calls himself a mufti, who basically specializes by putting all of these ridiculous opinions or shared anomalous opinions together and creating madhab of anomalous opinions. Now, if someone goes and follows someone like that, they're not sincere for me, because they're not looking for the truth. They're looking to just, you might as well just let's be honest. Is that being true to the religion of Islam? That's an extreme. But the other extreme is those guys that have a few scholars that they take from like that, and anything that comes out of that band of scholars is unacceptable. These are these are the two extremes. You have the extreme of these guys saying that you can have 5 scholars, all of them are Saudi Arabia. They have to be men 70 years old or over from Saudi, and any thing is from any fatwa has to be from those. And the other extreme is the other guys who say, no, let's just put all the most anomalous opinions together. You know, smoke weed, go get mortgage. I don't know, like all those things. And let's enjoy. You know, this is a joke now. You made the religion into a joke. You know what I mean? So there's a middle ground, and the middle ground is best. And so just to summarize, try and follow a madhab, A. B, when it comes to fatwa, listen around, see what's out there, And if the person has precedent and evidence and they seem to understand the content of whatever it is they're talking about, then there's no problem in following that opinion. Don't attack people that have different opinions. If you can't distinguish between people that two scholars of equal weight and with equal precedent and equal evidence, then you can either go for the safer option or you can go for the easier option. And I would go for the safer options when it comes to the foundational matters of Islam, and I would go for the easier things when it comes to things that would help people that are elderly, weak, you know, or make life easier for your family or something like this. And don't be dogmatic. Be tolerant to different opinions. لا إنكار في مسائل الاجتهاد. There's no blame in these things, you know, and we live on.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. I think we'll end the questions there. Apologize if anyone didn't get their questions answered, but yeah, we tried to get through as many as we could. Yeah, if anyone wants to check out anything else from Mohammed Hijab, they can obviously visit his YouTube channel. There's also IRA and Sapiens Institute that he mentioned as well. Yeah, obviously just search him online, and there's many things that he's already done in the scene, alhamdulillah. But thank you, Jazakallah khair, Mohammed Hijab, for coming down and giving us your time. Some very interesting arguments and theories. But yeah, inshallah, we're gonna have our allocate the prize to the winner now. So feel
What's the
free to
prize?
prize is a £20 gift voucher.
A'udhu billah. Come on, you have more than that from the contributions.
Well, there's actually a prize for every single talk this week. So
oh, okay, fair enough. Let's see who gets it.
the winner is
Chowdhury.
Mustafa Chowdhury, inshallah. Yeah, we'll get in contact with you and we'll give you the prize.
Inshallah, I like it. Guys are nice, very generous to Mustafa Chowdhury there.
Yes, alhamdulillah. But Jazakallah khair, Mohammed Hijab. Inshallah, we look forward to inviting you down in person, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah, I came before. I'm not sure if you guys remember.
Yeah, we remember. You came. Yeah, you came to the Isoc and then came to the prayer room afterwards as well and had some food with us. So yeah, that was.
We need to do that again.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, when this pandemic's over.